Well, I took the photograph because my mum was telling me about how she used to work in a tennis ball factory there, and we'd researched the actual building, Albion buildings. It shows that how something could have been so thriving in like its early days, yet now it sort of looks derelict, and you wouldn't really know if anything was in there because there's like old flags hanging in the window and stuff, and you can't really tell that it's actually occupied by businesses, and it's just strange to see the changes.
While the shops and the people have changed, and it's the roads have become more pedestrianised, the buildings have stayed the same pretty much. All the buildings are basically the same as what they were about 60 years ago. So I think the core of the town has stayed the same.
There used to be 2 cinemas in Nuneaton town centre, from what I can remember, from asking my granddad. When we had both the old cinemas, because again with the price being so low, you could go with families. A lot of families could go and they could pay and they wouldn't have to worry about the price, and they could go to the Palace and the Ritz every week, like every Saturday morning, every Sunday morning. It'd be sort of a weekly tradition, whereas now, because of the price, people may only go once a month or once every 2 weeks because they can't afford to go.
The shop here, it's the oldest. It's the oldest painted sign shop in Nuneaton, and it used to be a bootmaker's, as it says on the sign, but now it's turned into a Chinese takeaway called the Golden Bridge. And in the background you can also see the pharmacist. That's stayed mostly the same as well. But you can see from the old traditional writing, this was from the 30s again, probably, maybe, possibly even before that. So now it's turned into a new international food takeaway shop. It retains some of the town's history, and you can look back at what it used to be, and it's just right next to the modern shops that are still there today. You can see what changes there were and how things have changed since then.
No one's really interested in the architecture or anything of buildings anymore. So they just want to go into town, get what they want from town, and then go back about their business. They don't have the time to stop and just look. Well, I'm a bit upset with it, but on the other hand, I'm all right with it. Really, I'm not really bothered by it. But then with the old buildings and the fact that they're just taking things out and not putting anything else in their place that can be useful or different, it's all just shops and shops and shops. We don't really need it.
The meaning of the picture is sort of about the old and the new, and how like the bank and sort of the church would have been such big parts of the town, but now if you said to most people where's Yorkshire Bank, they wouldn't have a clue. And it's about how sport, like I've said, it's quite pretentious, like sports and religion, which I don't really know if that is the meaning of the picture really, but I mean it's sort of about the old and the new and how they go together in absolutely no way.
It just shows how time has adapted, how the society has adapted over time to suit the situation. So as more shops have turned about, they've built shops underneath what originally was a social club or a social place for people to gather. It's still the same under the same logo, so they're still both a cooperative and they're still both the same company. They don't use it as a cooperative social hall anymore.
I got an older photo of the co-op hall that's now been torn down, with a Lidl in its place. So I fully, just showed how bad it is and how vulgar things can turn from looking so pristine. It's because it was originally, the place to be. It had big bands like The Who, all the Rolling Stones and Aerosmith got booed off from the stage. So it's got that much historical value, and they just took it down for a cheap, the cheap place in town now. So I think now with the rope walk and everything, it's all just shops, and whenever people do meet up, the only place where you can really sit down is just the cafes, and then McDonald's, of course, but it's just, there's no place now where things like what happened to my granddad can happen. It's all just gone.
Well, I'm not really sure, because everyone feels like the good old days were better, and this nostalgia. Because I'm sure if you go back to the 1930s, people in the 1930s would look back to, say, the 1880s or something and think that those were the golden days of life. And people in the 1880s would look back. So people looking back and thinking those were the best times, maybe that's not so true.
The Pig and Whistle was like the roughest pub in Nuneaton. Like, it was so rough, and it always had smashed windows, and no matter how many times they were fixed, they'd be smashed by the next Saturday night. And they've closed it down so many times, and they keep opening it back up and keep trying the hardest to make it into this kind of like gourmet pub, or this pub where kind of families can go, but it just kind of always attracts the same crowd because of the part of town it is, and because the history it has. You were told not to walk past it. To me, I know it's bad, and I know that I'm English, but St George's flags to me represent hooliganism. They represent racism. They don't represent like the freedom and pride of the nation that they're probably supposed to. Like, in the last 2 years, there's been quite a few like English Defence League marches and stuff, which would probably be interesting to have a look at how long their presence has been particularly big in Nuneaton. And like, we did have a BNP candidate who didn't do that badly. Like, to be honest, he got quite a lot of like support.
I think it's really interesting seeing how things can affect people. Like, I think living in an industrial town has affected me like politically, and I suppose like my mental health as well at times, because living somewhere where people are sort of working class, I'm quite like neurotic, and I always get scared of all the people here. And I think just the way everything looks so harsh and things like that, it just doesn't like make you feel comfortable, I don't think.
Oh, I'm sorry, I feel really bad. I love Nuneaton. It's my hometown. I do like it. I don't mean to be so negative about it. I think it's a good place to grow up. I think it's a really good place. There's a lot of, and the facilities of the town are great. Like, I've had a really positive experience with Nuneaton, really. But I think it's just growing up and going to other places, and I know this sounds weird, but where I work at the moment, a lot of it's working with like underprivileged children. And I think if you'd asked me last summer how I would have felt about the town, I would have spoken very differently. But I've had a very different experience this summer of a different side, and just the huge amount of just poverty. And I don't want to say abuse, but just how fortunate I've been with the family that I've had, and it's just made me think very differently about Nuneaton.
This is a tunnel at the end of my street, and it's sort of like a railway tunnel, I think. Like, trains go above it and stuff like that. And apparently it's quite old. People tell me it's like Victorian and stuff like that, but whether or not it is, I'm not quite sure. And it sort of leads, like, if you walk down there, round the corners sort of like more industrial estates and things like that. But then if you keep going, it goes to like the posh area of town and stuff. And I just thought it was interesting to see how what I think is quite nice brickwork and things like that because it's sort of spiralling and that, but contrasted with the weird graffiti just all over the walls. I think it just shows that it's just another town that's filled with people that sort of disrespect their surroundings and things like that. And I think you can see the difference between the different areas. Like, everyone used to play in that tunnel and stuff, like they used to play around on the streets. And it sort of feels more like a community, but not one that you'd really like to be involved in.
I remember telling one of my friends that I was on this thing, well, this course, and he's just saying, "What history in Nuneaton? You know, there's nothing to it. It's just a town." So they were all quite surprised when I told them about the cart hall and, you know, the mining and everything. So yeah, I don't think they know anything.